The RCMP, for example, spent $24,000 on coaching for committee. Public health spent $20,000. But the worst offender was the CBC at nearly $80,000.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. We have a special guest on the show with us. It's someone that we've actually been trying to coordinate with for a while because he's been putting out some really, really good videos, and scheduling and convention and everything in between has just not allowed us to sync up, but we are thrilled that we were able to do that today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Member of Parliament for Souris Moose Mountain, Stephen Bonk. Stephen, welcome to Northern Perspective.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad that we could finally get this to work out.
So you've been putting out some really, really good videos from your office, and it's based on some of the research that you've done and your team. The last one that we saw that was really, really fascinating to us, and I know fascinating to a lot of Canadians out there, was on Brookfield, their involvement in the climate crisis, and
Mm.
some of their businesses. The latest one that you put out a few days ago really caught our eye, and it's these stories that come out of left field when it comes to some of these issues. But give us just a general overview of what you found when it comes to the government preparing witnesses for committee.
Yeah, so in government, we have committees where we discuss bills, we discuss making amendments to bills, discussing expenditures, just making sure that government stays in their lane where they should be. And some of the witnesses that we've had come forward, especially government witnesses, have just answered questions in the most complicated and unintelligible way possible. And it got us thinking, are they being coached to do this? Because normal people don't talk like this. I know people in my riding, and I'm sure in your riding, are just good, honest folks. You ask them a simple question, they give you a straightforward answer. And we sure weren't seeing that in committee. So what we did is we put forward what's called an OPQ request, or an order paper question. And that's where government has to answer the written questions that we provide them. And some of the information we got back was shocking.
And we've covered some of these order paper questions. Um, why does the government have to answer this? Why can't they obfuscate? Why can't they kind of dance around it? Why do they have to answer these questions?
I know it's unusual for Canadians to see the government actually answering questions, because when we look at question period, for example, the government always answers the question that they wish we had asked them instead of the question we actually did ask them. But when we do an order paper question, they actually by law have to, by convention, they have to answer our questions.
So that's interesting that the opposition actually has a mechanism to force them to answer questions. Now they don't have to do it very quickly. I know that they can take some time in order to get back to you. But in this case, how long did it take them to get back to you on this specific OPQ?
I believe we put the question in November. I think that's when we did. So it does take some time, and they can actually drag it out longer if they wish. But I believe it's 6 months that they have to answer our questions.
But what it essentially
But
came out to in the answer was, so if I can paraphrase, the question was essentially, are is the government paying for any type of coaching for people going into committee? And if so, how much is that? And the answer is shocking. It came out to around $260,000 of taxpayer money. Is that right?
exactly, $263,000. And when we go through the list, it's actually quite shocking. You'll have the RCMP, for example, spent $24,000 on coaching for committee. Public health spent $20,000. But the worst offender was the CBC at nearly $80,000. Now, keep in mind, the CBC gets $1.4 billion from the taxpayer every year, and they're a communications company. And if you look at the org chart of the CBC and you go through it and you see how many directors of communications they have, it'll just It's mind blowing. Why on earth they would need to get outside consultants to help them answer simple questions in the most complicated and convoluted way possible is reprehensible in my books.
And you showed some great interactions between Andrew Scheer and in the previous the previous CEO. Um, and it was mind-boggling. And we actually covered some of these committee meetings ourselves on Northern Perspective. And it was so frustrating hearing some of the answers. So I guess this led to this whole question of, how can you possibly be coming in here and talking this way when nobody talks this way in the real world, which led to the OPQ in the first place. So what was the reaction of yourselves and your colleagues when you got the response from this OPQ?
Disbelief, to be honest, because when you have a company like CBC who are a communications company, you would think the last thing they would need would be coaching. But when you really put this into perspective, when you look at what is going on here, this isn't a simple process. So when the government spends money, they have to put out it's our RFP, or a request for proposal. So they put out a proposal saying that they would like coaching services for the CBC or the RCMP, whoever it might be. That has to go to tender. Then that has to be approved, and then it has to have some government oversight. Well, at least we hope that there's some government oversight. This isn't a simple process. And nowhere in that whole process did anyone stop and think, are we doing the right thing here by taxpayers? This is taxpayers' money, and they're spending it in such silly ways to answer simple questions. It just makes no sense to the average Canadian.
Now, I worked for the government for 3 years, and one of the questions that Catherine was asked repeatedly, over and over and over again, by Rachel Thomas and Andrew Scheer and others is, um, how much were your bonuses, or how much were your executives paid in bonuses? And she had the unmitigated gall to respond and say, well, we don't pay bonuses.
Yeah.
And technically, I guess you could say that that's true, because even at my organization, we didn't call them bonuses. We called it at-risk pay.
Hmm.
So, um, and the mechanism is the exact same as a bonus, but they just don't want Canadians to hear the term bonus, because obviously they don't want to see any backlash from the average taxpayer that people in government are actually getting paid bonuses. But that's what we ended up hearing, and it was answers like that that were, I think, the most frustrating. So when the CBC tries to say with a straight face to Canadians that they are independent, how could they possibly be independent when the government is paying for coaching out of taxpayer dollars, not out of the CBC budget, for the CBC executives to actually come in and answer questions? How is that possible?
Yeah, it kind of defies logic. So when you have a public broadcaster that is being subsidized by the taxpayer to the tune of $1.4 billion, just common sense would make you think that they are dependent on the government. So how can they be independent and dependent at the same time? That's just something that I can't square that circle. I don't know how they do.
Well, and this is why I think there's a larger and larger breadth of Canadians every year that are not tuning into the CBC, because the CBC is saying one thing, but their actions are saying something completely different. And they don't operate like any other business in Canada, where you have to satisfy your customers, you have to make money, or you go out of business. Well, apparently, if you're the CBC, you don't have to do that. All you have to do is just ask for more government money, and that's all you get, which is I believe it's what, 250 million more dollars they're going to be getting
Yeah, that was
from
just
Mark
announced.
Carney.
Exactly. That was just announced. But that's where it's very important for organizations or individuals like yourself who are putting out this information that the legacy media won't touch. But this is the kind of thing that's extremely important to our taxpayers, to our voters. They want to know what the government is spending money on and that they're spending it wisely. And as we see, the legacy media hasn't picked this up, but there's been some independent reporting that has. But that's where it's really important that we have voices like yours and other creators who are putting out information that our voters need to hear.
And is it correct that the $80,000 that was used for coaching is above and beyond the $1.4 billion that the CBC is already receiving from taxpayers?
Yeah, this was in the question we asked. We'd asked, are they getting paid? Are they paying for coaching? And so that would we would make the assumption that this is above and beyond the money that they're receiving, the 1.4 million from taxpayers, which makes no sense because this is a communications company. If they can't answer questions, and but even getting back to the more the philosophical point of this, if you're answering questions honestly and truthfully, you shouldn't need coaching. It should be very simple. I know, like for this interview, I've had no coaching. You've had no coaching. It's not hard. If we ask simple questions and we get simple answers, life's pretty easy. But when you lie or when you make up answers or when you're spinning things in a way that it makes it difficult for people to really understand what you're doing, that's when you need coaching. And like they say, if you tell the truth, there's one version of events. But if you tell a lie or you mislead, there's an infinite number of ways you could take it. So it's I don't know. I just don't understand the philosophical point behind this, how they can justify this to the Canadian taxpayer.
And I know some folks might say, well, $80,000 is really just a drop in the bucket compared to 1.4 billion. But this is more than the average Canadian makes in a year. How should taxpayers feel about their money being used in this manner?
Yeah, like $80,000 is a good down payment on a house. I mean, this is important. This is a lot of money. But money aside, which money is very important, but it's the philosophical point behind it. When you're not being straight with the taxpayers, when you're having to have coaching to spin an issue, there's something fundamentally wrong there. And this is what we need to bring to light and stop.
Well, and even on that, um, and you raise this in the video and you raise this here, nobody sat back and said, wait a minute, maybe this isn't the right thing to do. I recall when I was asked to come and testify at committee, and it was offered that the government could pay for travel and lodging to a certain extent. And my response was, no, thank you. No, thank you, because there's enough that needs to be paid for by taxpayer money. I don't want the taxpayers, paying for my travel and lodgings to go to a parliamentary committee to testify on a really important subject. And I didn't have any coaching. No coaching was offered to me. And to your
Mhm.
point, it's really easy to answer yes or no questions based on what you
Exactly.
know. And again, to your point, there are communications companies. You're telling me that with all of the directors and all the executives and all the people that are allegedly experts and top in their field, no one could sit down with Catherine Tate and say, all right, Catherine, this is how you should answer in committee. No, they needed to go to tender and waste more salary of other government employees to actually go. It's beyond belief, but I guess beyond belief is the norm now in Canada when it comes to wasting taxpayer money from this government, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it just goes back to that simple thing about telling the truth. I remember when I was a little kid, my dad said to me, he said, make sure you tell the truth because your memory isn't good enough to lie." And that's what happens when you see these people having to have coaching when they're kind of not necessarily outright lying, but they're trying to mislead or misdirect the public. It's You shouldn't have to do that. Just answer the questions straightforward. Canadian taxpayers want to know. They want to know the answers.
So this is just one thing that you've been seeing with this government. Um, what has shocked you the most about Mark Carney's Liberals? Um, and I know that might be a long list, but what has shocked you the most about this government?
What shocked me the most, and what I think isn't getting enough attention, is the discrepancy between what they talk about and what they actually produce. So they've made a lot of announcements. They've gone all over the world. They've made a lot of MOUs. They've had a lot of great sound bites. But when you look at actually what this government has accomplished, it's almost nothing. And they haven't been held to account for that. I think that the mainstream media hasn't done a very good job of actually matching up what they are saying with with the results.
And we've been trying to explain to Canadians what all these quote unquote deals that Mark Carney has been signing really mean. And I've described it as he's either renewing deals that were already there and actually put in place by the Conservatives back
Yeah.
under Stephen Harper, or he's signing new quote unquote trade deals that actually doesn't guarantee any revenue coming into Canada at all. The
Mhm.
way I describe it is it's almost as if you build a brand new highway and no cars choose to drive on that highway. And you can have all of these deals with all these different countries around the world. But if the majority of Canadian businesses are trading with the United States, it's going to cost them a lot more money to actually pick up their business and move it to take quote unquote advantage of any of these trade relationships. So while these trade
Yeah.
corridors might be open, Canadian businesses have no incentive to use them, do they?
No, and so this is a little bit about my background. So I was involved in international trade for 20 years, and before I got into provincial politics, where I was the Minister of Economy and Trade in Saskatchewan. So I know a little bit about this file. And one thing I can tell you about Mark Carney is that when he goes and he makes the deal with, let's just use China for an example. What we give up to China is immediate. That happens now. What they give to us is sometime in the future. Perhaps they'll promise, like we look at canola, for example. The Chinese government has pushed back the decision on if they're going to reduce tariffs again. So um, he hasn't made a very good impression for me about how he's handling our trade negotiations. We have our largest partner is right across the border. I live very close to the U.S. border. We ship commodities across the border all the time. It's long-standing relationships, and it seems like we've been focused on everything else, but then making a deal with our closest neighbor and ally. And I know times are a little bit tricky right now dealing with the administration, but it doesn't mean we should obfuscate that responsibility. We have to talk to them. We have to get a deal done because this is 75% of the trade in Canada.
Well, and as we've been saying on Northern Perspective, presidents come and go, but this relationship with the
Mhm.
United States, that's here to stay. And any country in Europe would switch places with us in a microsecond to be right
In a
next door
heartbeat.
to the largest economy and most lucrative trade relationship on the planet, wouldn't they?
They sure would. And it by no means does this mean that we should put all our eggs in one basket and not diversify our trade. But when you have 75% of your trade with long-standing relationships, and we're so close geographically and culturally, it makes sense to really foster that relationship. And I think it's very irresponsible to declare a permanent rupture in our relationship. Um, we're not at that point yet, and I'm very pleased with the statements that our leader Pierre Poilievre has put out in the last few days, especially in his speech at the Economic Club of Canada, where he really laid out the Conservatives' vision for what trade could be in Canada, and hopefully we can get our country back to what it was, like to what we could be, what we should be. You know, a very very strong middle power country with a strong middle class, and we have everything here that the world wants. It's just we're handcuffing ourselves. It's policies made here in Ottawa that are really affecting us.
I used to work in IT for 20 years, and we used to have two sayings. Number one was trust but verify, and number two is always have a plan B. So the way I would approach the U.S. seems to be what the conservatives are proposing in saying, you know what, let's trust that we're going to have a positive trade relationship going forward, regardless of the president in the United States. Let's get something done. But verify is, well, you don't just take it at face value. You have to fight for that and make sure that you are actually going to be getting the best trade deal that you can with them. And then the always have a plan B comes into play where, sure, we can have a pipeline shipping oil down to the United States, but we should always have a plan B where we have other pipelines able to serve other customers so that if the United States does try to do anything like this in the future, now you have an off ramp of that oil. You can turn on the tap and ship more of it elsewhere and actually have some leverage over the United States. Is that, in a nutshell, what the conservatives are suggesting?
Exactly. That's it. We need some redundancy built into our program, into our plan. But if you look at some of the silly things that our government has done to this country, we've just handcuffed ourselves in the most ridiculous way possible. Last week, there was a shipment of LNG that came from Australia to Eastern Canada. Now, from what I understand, we have the third largest reserves of oil and gas in the world. Why on earth are we shipping LNG from Australia to Canada? This makes no sense. We could be supplying not only ourselves, but a good part of the global demand from Canada. And these are kind of the silly things that are really frustrating to most conservatives, where we have the resources, we have the people, we have the potential, and we're just not realizing it.
And one of our viewers did some calculations. I'm not sure if they were based on something. I haven't verified this, but they calculated that that in order to get that LNG from Australia to Canada, it burned about 20,000 tons of carbon into
Yeah,
the atmosphere. That our government is allegedly telling everybody that we're setting the planet on fire by doing that. So how does that make any sense whatsoever?
exactly. When we have to decarbonize our energy here, yet we're burning silly amounts of carbon, bringing LNG all the way from Australia. Like, it just makes no sense. I don't even know what to tell you.
So for Canadians across the country that are, they may have voted for Mark Carney that are now raising an eyebrow as to what's going on, or Canadians that didn't vote for Mark Carney, um, what would you tell them? What would you suggest them to do as they see these stories come out that don't make any sense to them, but about what their government is doing?
I think doing a little research. For example, I did a little video about some of the green hypocrisy that we're seeing from Mark Carney, where he promised one thing. He told everyone he was a green champion. He did bring over a lot of voters from the NDP to the Liberals and the Green Party to the Liberals. And then we find out that he's burning down the rainforest, or that Brookfield, the company that he was involved in, is burning down the rainforest. Like, this is hypocrisy. We see the same thing now with his trade deals. He's making MOUs all over the world, or signing MOUs all over the world, yet we haven't seen any results. Most of these are non-binding. I think for voters, they need to do a little bit of research, and I think they're coming that way now by themselves. But when they actually match up the intention and the results, there's a big discrepancy there. And I think with Mark Carney, he's got all the fun stuff out of the way. He had the G7. He's been signing all these trade deals and the MOUs and traveling all over the world. But now he's got the economic reality of Canada, and that's going to come home to roost.